The blizzard arrived suddenly across the wide open plains, and the sky turned white and angry as the wind howled without mercy. Snow moved like a living wall and swallowed fences, trees, and roads until the land disappeared. On a quiet ranch near the edge of the valley, a large draft horse named Bear stood inside a wooden barn, feeling the storm before any human could understand it. His thick coat rose and fell as he breathed, and his ears shifted toward the sound of the wind pressing hard against the walls. Bear was a powerful horse built for work and patience rather than speed. His legs were strong and steady, and his body carried the weight of years of pulling heavy loads across rough ground. The rancher Luke trusted Bear more than any other animal he owned. Bear never panicked and never refused work, and always stood calm even when machines failed or weather turned harsh. Luke believed Bear was only a work animal and nothing more. Luke finished his evening checks as the storm worsened and snow slammed against his coat. He moved through the barn carefully, making sure every door was shut and every animal had food and water. When he reached Bear, he rested a hand on the horse's neck and spoke softly, telling him the storm would pass and that morning would come. Bear stood still, but his eyes stayed alert and focused, as if listening to something far away. Luke tied the rope securely and closed the barn doors tight. He felt confident that all was safe and headed back to the house while the wind roared louder. Inside the warm kitchen, Luke poured a drink and watched snow pile against the window. He had seen many storms in his life and believed this one was no different. Outside, the barn stood strong and quiet, holding everything in place. Far beyond the ranch, across a frozen creek and a low ridge, stood a small wooden cabin hidden among bare trees. A native mother named Asha lived there with her 2 children, Neela and Tommy. The cabin was old but built with care and love, and it had protected them through many winters. Asha had prepared wood and food, but the storm came earlier and stronger than expected, and the cold crept inside faster than before. The fire burned low as the night went on, and the wind forced snow through tiny cracks in the walls. Asha wrapped her children in thick blankets and held them close. She spoke softly to keep them calm and strong while she fed the fire the last pieces of wood. The room grew colder with each passing moment, and her breath became visible in the air. By midnight, the fire turned into weak embers and the cold tightened its grip. Asha checked the children and felt fear rise inside her chest. Their small hands were cold and their bodies trembled beneath the blankets. She knew staying inside would not save them. The nearest help was the ranch far across the ridge, but reaching it meant facing the storm. Asha made a difficult decision with steady hands and quiet strength. She tied the children close to her so the wind would not pull them apart and wrapped herself in every layer she had. She whispered words of courage taught by her elders and opened the cabin door. The storm rushed inside instantly and pushed against her with crushing force. The cold struck like a blade, and snow filled her eyes and mouth. Each step forward was slow and heavy as snow rose past her knees. The world disappeared into white noise and freezing wind. She leaned forward, protecting the children with her body, and kept moving step by step, guided only by memory and determination. Back at the ranch, Bear shifted inside his stall and stamped his hoof against the ground. The storm was loud, but something else stirred him deeply. Beneath the scent of snow and wood, he sensed fear carried by the wind. His head lifted and his muscles tightened as if called by something unseen. Bear pulled against the rope and felt it hold. He pulled again, stronger this time, and let out a deep sound filled with urgency. He was not afraid but focused and driven. The barn creaked and snow slipped through the gaps as Bear strained forward. Luke heard the noise from inside the house and paused. Bear was never restless and never loud without reason. Luke grabbed his coat and stepped back into the storm, fighting the wind to reach the barn. He opened the door and saw Bear pulling toward the far ridge with eyes locked on the distance. Luke spoke firmly, telling Bear to settle and calm down. He believed the storm had made the horse nervous and tightened the rope before closing the door again. He told himself it was nothing and turned back toward the house, unaware of what was unfolding beyond the ridge. Out in the storm, Asha stumbled and fell into the snow. The weight of the wind pushed her sideways and stole her breath. She struggled back to her feet, holding the children close, and moved forward again, though her strength faded quickly. The cold burned her skin and her vision blurred. She fell once more and knelt in the snow, shielding the children from the wind. Their breathing grew shallow and their bodies went still. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she pressed her forehead to the snow and whispered prayers for strength and guidance. At the ranch, Bear pulled again with every ounce of his strength. The rope snapped under the pressure and Bear surged forward. The stall door gave way as he pushed through and stepped into the storm without hesitation. Snow wrapped around his legs, but his powerful body pressed on, guided by instinct older than training or fences. Luke heard the crash and rushed outside, calling Bear's name. He saw the broken rope and the open barn door and felt fear strike his chest. He grabbed a lantern and followed the wide tracks leading into the white darkness. Bear moved steadily toward the ridge, leaning into the wind and snow. Each step was slow but certain, and nothing forced him to stop. Somewhere ahead, a mother knelt over her children, losing strength with every breath. Luke followed the tracks, fighting the storm, unaware that the horse he trusted for work was about to reveal a purpose far greater than anything he had imagined. The wind screamed across the land as Bear pushed forward through the deep snow, and every step felt heavy, but his body never hesitated. His wide chest broke through drifts and his legs moved with slow power learned from years of hard work. The storm struck his face and covered his eyes, but he kept his head low and followed the pull inside him that refused to fade. Behind him, Luke struggled to keep pace as the lantern shook wildly in his hand and the light bent and vanished in the snow. Each breath burned his lungs and his boots sank deep with every step. He shouted Bear's name again and again, but the wind tore the sound away. Fear filled him, not only for the horse but for whatever could have driven such a calm animal into the storm. Bear crossed the frozen creek where ice cracked beneath his weight yet held firm. Snow hid the edges, but his instincts guided him safely across. On the far side, the wind shifted and carried a scent that sharpened his focus. It was faint but real and full of life and danger mixed together. Far ahead, Asha tried to rise again, but her legs shook beneath her. The storm wrapped around her like a cage, and the cold drained her strength. She pulled the children closer and whispered words meant to keep them awake and present. Her voice was weak yet steady as she refused to give in to fear. Neela stirred slightly, and Tommy let out a small breath that gave Asha a spark of hope. She pressed her face against theirs to share warmth and shield them from the wind. The ridge, she remembered, felt impossibly far, and the storm erased all sense of direction. Bear slowed as the wind shifted again, and he lifted his head, catching the scent stronger now. His ears turned forward and his steps angled slightly to the left. Snow climbed higher, but his strength carried him through without pause. Luke followed the tracks closely, now feeling both relief and confusion. He had never seen Bear move with such purpose and certainty. It felt as if the horse was being guided by something unseen and powerful. Luke stumbled once and nearly fell, but forced himself onward, driven by the same pull he could not explain. Bear crested a small rise and saw a shape in the snow ahead. It was low and still, and nearly hidden by drifting white. He moved closer, carefully lowering his head and breathing deep. The shape shifted slightly, and a soft sound reached him through the storm. Asha felt warmth brush against her side and thought at first it was a trick of the cold. She lifted her head slowly, and through the snow saw a massive dark shape standing beside her. Fear rose for a moment before she saw the calm eyes watching her, and the gentle breath rising in the cold air. Bear stood over them, blocking the wind with his body, and lowering his head to sniff the children. His warmth spread around them like a wall, and the storm felt less cruel in his shadow. Asha reached out with shaking hands and rested them against his neck, feeling life and strength beneath his coat. She whispered thanks through trembling lips and leaned closer to him. Bear stayed still as stone and shifted his stance to shield them better. His breath steamed around them and his body took the full force of the wind. Moments later, Luke reached the rise and froze at the sight before him. The lantern light revealed Bear standing over a woman and two small children half buried in snow. Luke rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside them, and disbelief washed over his face. He checked the children quickly and felt their faint breaths still moving. Relief hit him hard, and he looked at Asha, who met his eyes with quiet strength and exhaustion. Words failed him as he realized what Bear had done. Luke pulled blankets from his pack and wrapped the children tighter before helping Asha to her feet. Bear stayed close, pressing his side against them, offering warmth and balance. Luke spoke calmly, guiding them back toward the ranch, knowing the storm was still dangerous. The journey back was slow, but Bear led the way, breaking through snow and choosing the safest path. Luke stayed close, holding the lantern low, while Asha leaned against Bear for support. Each step felt like a battle, but hope grew with every move forward. When they reached the creek, Bear stepped carefully again, testing the ice before crossing. Luke followed, watching every move with new respect and awe. The storm still howled, but its grip felt weaker now. At the barn, Luke opened the doors wide and guided everyone inside. Warm air rushed out to meet them, and Bear stepped in without hesitation. Luke helped Asha and the children settle near the stalls and started a fire quickly. As warmth returned, color slowly came back to the children's faces and their breathing steadied. Asha held them close, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from fear now, but relief. She rested her hand against Bear's neck again, whispering words of gratitude. Luke stood quietly, watching the horse, who now stood calm and steady as ever, as if nothing unusual had happened. The weight of the night pressed on him, and he realized he had never truly known Bear until now. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the barn, life held firm, carried by courage, instinct, and a bond that no one could have predicted. Morning light tried to push through the storm, but the sky remained pale and heavy, and snow still moved across the land. Inside the barn, warmth slowly returned as the fire crackled and filled the space with soft sound. Bear stood quietly near Asha and the children, his head low, and his breathing calm, as if guarding them even now. Luke brought hot water and simple food, moving carefully and speaking gently. He watched the children closely as they slowly woke and stirred. Neela opened her eyes first and looked around with confusion before spotting Asha and relaxing again. Tommy followed soon after, his small hand gripping his mother's sleeve as he took steady breaths. Asha held them both and whispered comfort while the warmth eased the cold from their bodies. Her face showed deep tiredness but also strong resolve. She thanked Luke in a quiet voice and told him she would never forget what he and his horse had done. Luke shook his head slowly, still struggling to understand the night. He had lived on this land for many years and believed he knew storms and animals well. Yet what he saw had changed something inside him. He looked at Bear not as a tool or helper, but as a thinking being with purpose and heart. As the storm slowly weakened, Luke helped Asha and the children rest on clean blankets. He brought more wood and kept the fire steady while checking the weather outside. Snow still covered everything, but the wind had lost some of its anger. Bear remained close and only moved when the children shifted. He lowered his head once and let Neela touch his soft nose. Her small smile brought a warmth to the barn that no fire could match. By midday, the storm began to fade and the sky opened slightly, allowing a soft glow to fall across the snow. Luke prepared a small sled and blankets, knowing the cabin would need checking. Asha agreed to return with him once the children were strong enough to move. The journey back was slow but peaceful compared to the night before. Bear pulled the sled with gentle strength while Luke guided the way. Asha sat beside her children, watching the land with new eyes. The storm had changed everything and revealed hidden paths and bonds. When they reached the cabin, Luke helped clear the snow from the door and made sure the place was safe and warm again. He fixed small breaks in the walls and stacked fresh wood by the fire. Bear stood nearby, calm and patient, watching over them. Asha prepared warm food and shared it with everyone, including Luke. They sat quietly, listening to the soft wind outside. Gratitude filled the small space and words were few but meaningful. Before leaving, Luke offered help whenever needed, and Asha accepted with a nod. They shared a look of mutual respect built through hardship and trust. Luke promised to return with supplies and check on them often. As Luke and Bear headed back toward the ranch, the land felt different to Luke. Every tree and ridge now held deeper meaning. He walked beside Bear instead of ahead of him, his hand resting gently on the horse's shoulder. Back at the ranch, Luke opened the barn doors and let Bear settle into his stall. He did not tie the rope this time. He left the door open and trusted the choice that Bear would make. News of the storm spread quickly across nearby lands, and soon neighbors came asking questions. Luke told the story quietly without pride, but with honesty. People listened in disbelief and wonder as they learned what the draft horse had done. Some came to see Bear for themselves and stood in silence watching the calm, powerful animal. Bear accepted their presence without reaction, simply breathing and standing steady. Asha visited the ranch days later with her children, now stronger and smiling. She brought handmade gifts as thanks and spoke with Luke about the land and old stories. She told him some animals carry wisdom beyond human sight, and Bear was one of them. Luke listened closely and felt the truth in her words. He realized the land was alive in ways he had forgotten, and that respect mattered more than control. Life returned to routine, but nothing felt the same. Luke changed how he worked and listened more carefully to the animals around him. Bear was no longer just a horse but a partner and guardian. One evening as the sun dipped low and snow reflected golden light, Luke stood by the fence watching Bear graze peacefully. He thought about the night of the storm and the quiet courage that saved lives. Asha and her children watched the same sunset from their cabin, feeling safe and strong once more. They spoke of the horse with gentle smiles and taught gratitude through story and memory. The blizzard became part of the land's history and part of their lives. It carried lessons of courage, connection, and trust that would not fade. And Bear the draft horse returned to his calm ways, yet those who knew the story understood that beneath his steady presence lived a spirit willing to face any storm for those in need. Weeks passed after the storm, and the land slowly healed under the soft return of winter sun. Snow melted in gentle lines and revealed paths that had been hidden for many days. Life returned to a steady rhythm, yet the memory of that night stayed alive in every quiet moment. Luke woke each morning with a new sense of awareness and respect. He no longer rushed through his chores or treated the land as something to control. He watched the sky more carefully and listened to the animals as if they carried messages he had once ignored. Bear moved through his days with the same calm strength he always had. He pulled loads, stood patiently, and rested in the sun when work was done. Yet Luke noticed small things that felt different. Bear watched the distance often, and lifted his head when the wind changed, as if still guarding the land. People from nearby areas continued to visit the ranch wanting to see the horse who faced the storm. Luke never encouraged attention, and never sold the story for praise. He simply told the truth when asked, and allowed people to understand in their own way. Asha returned often, bringing warm bread, dried herbs, and quiet stories. She spoke to Luke about balance and how land remembers those who respect it. She told her children stories of courage and taught them that strength can be gentle and silent. Neela and Tommy grew close to Bear and spent time brushing his coat and feeding him apples. Bear accepted their presence without fear and stood as steady as a mountain. The children laughed and spoke softly to him as if he understood every word. One afternoon, a new storm approached, though smaller than the last. Clouds gathered and the wind shifted across the plains. Luke felt the familiar tension rise in his chest, but this time he did not panic. He prepared the ranch carefully and left the barn door open for Bear to move freely. As snow began to fall, Bear stood near the fence and watched the ridge. Luke stood beside him, feeling calm and ready. The storm passed without harm, and the land rested again. That night Luke sat by the fire and thought about how close everything had come to loss. He realized that the storm did not create courage but revealed it. The strength had always been there, waiting for the moment it was needed. Asha sat in her cabin the same night watching her children sleep peacefully. She felt gratitude fill her heart and sent quiet thanks into the world. She knew that some bonds are formed not by words but by actions taken in moments of need. Spring eventually arrived and green returned to the plains. Flowers pushed through the soil and birds filled the air with sound. The land breathed again and life felt renewed. Luke built a stronger bridge near the creek and cleared paths toward the cabin, making future journeys safer. He worked alongside neighbors and shared tools and time. The storm had reminded everyone that survival was not meant to be faced alone. Bear moved freely across the fields and stood tall against the bright sky. He remained the same calm draft horse to those who did not know the story. But to Luke and Asha and the children he was something more. One evening Luke stood at the fence watching the sunset paint the land gold and red. Bear stood beside him breathing slow and steady. Luke rested his hand against the horse and felt peace settle deep inside him. He understood now that some miracles arrive quietly without warning and without demand for reward. They come in the form of instinct, courage, and trust. The story of the blizzard became something passed gently through the community, not as a tale of wonder, but as a lesson of connection. It reminded people to listen to the land and to each other. Asha taught her children that night does not last forever and that help can come from unexpected places. Neela and Tommy carried that lesson forward with open hearts. As seasons changed, the memory of fear faded, but the memory of hope remained strong. The land stood wide and open once more, carrying the marks of survival and care. Bear returned to grazing under open skies, strong, calm, and quiet. He did not seek recognition and did not change his ways. He simply lived as he always had, guided by something deeper than training. Luke looked across the plains one last time that season and felt gratitude rise in his chest. He knew that the ranch was more than land and work. It was a place where trust had been proven and lives had been saved. And so the story settled into the land like new roots growing strong and unseen. A draft horse, a mother, a rancher, and 2 children remained connected by a single night that changed everything forever.